Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. The Honorable, let me just first of all respond to some of the things the Honorable Minister of, what ministry? Tourism. Tried to fabricate here this evening on a number of issues and try to put people's character and name into disrepute. Dedicated to that. And this is the hallmark of PNM, trying to win elections upon elections by painting the opposition as being in a different situation from them. But today I wouldn't want to deal too much about that. But we are in a situation now debating in the Honorable Senate, distinguished House, an amendment to the property tax. The property tax which was made into law in 2009. And from my understanding, Mr. Vice President, this is the 6th amendment to the property tax since 2009. So we brought that it was brought in 2009. Then the Minister of Finance had about 3 finance amendments under the Ministry of Finance on this act. But here we are today with a tax that is destructive, it is punitive, it is a pauperizing tax, it's a tyrannical tax, being imposed, Mr. Deputy Speaker, on a beleaguered and bewildered population, a population that is battered and suffocating a citizenry that is being strangled in terms of their standard of living. They cannot seem to breathe. They cannot exhale. They are unable to live properly. And citizens who over the years saved and paid tax on the board that they have to put up their house in and the cement and the sand and everything that they had to pay tax on already to build their little homes for themselves so that they can have a roof over their head, the government has now come to impose a tax on these poor people. Over 300,000 people in this country will be suffering from the imposition of this tax. It is a deadly tax, Honorable Vice President. And so I said, instead of us coming to debate today amendments to the property tax, we should be debating on the repeal of the property tax. And we want to alert the population. Our political leader and then Prime Minister in 2010 to 2015. In 2009, she fought the government in 2008 when they brought this legislation, fought against the property tax. And for 15 years, she continues to fight against the imposition of this property tax. And that is leadership. And that is where the mettle and the guts of a former Prime Minister who never wanted to see the people suffering in Trinidad and Tobago between 2010 and 2015. She made sure that not a cent of property tax was paid by any citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. And she promises that when she is re-elected as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, not a property tax money will be paid by any citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. We will repeal the Property Tax Act. And the member for the Senator, the Honorable Randall Mitchell, asked why we didn't repeal the Property Acts between 2010 and 2015. Every year during the budget debate, the Minister of Finance sought a 1-year annulment from year to year for 5 years. And as the Minister, as my colleague in the lower house indicated, Senator MP for Oropoch East, that there was a surreptitious grouping within the Ministry of Finance at that time when he was a member of the Law Reform Committee, they had tremendous difficulty in ensuring that this piece of legislation is repealed. And so they were frustrated. The People's Partnership government was frustrated in the law reform meetings by all sorts of surreptitious arguments against the repeal. And that is in the Hansard, in the law house of the honorable member for Oropochis. So to say today why we didn't repeal it, every year we sought to make sure that it is not put into practice. And the last time it would have had to be done was in December 2015, where we were out of office by that time. But you brought it on. You brought on all the amendments over a period of time, and now you impose the property tax and you come in with amendments to it now, while the people are suffering. So then the Minister of Finance, I feel really flabbergasted to understand the minister coming with some ghost type of bill to say that Minister Dukaran put in 2011 in terms of the property tax. Something was laid in the first reading, and that was scrapped altogether. And so for him and the Honorable Minister of Trade and Industry, of Trade and Tourism, and the Minister of Trade, most of their presentation was on a ghost piece of legislation which never saw the day of light under the People's Partnership government. It was first reading, and then nothing else happened. But they made the entire presentation based on what we did in 2011 and the 7.5% that Minister Dukaran implemented and so on. So they have nothing to defend themselves on, Mr. Vice President. I want to come now on the issue of what they're bringing all the time on Minister Hawaii and what he said, and we were going to bring the property tax into place. I want to quote from an article on Friday, August 28, 2015, The Guardian. Minister says property tax not a priority. This is Minister Hawaii. Government has no intention of implementing the property tax and will seek to extend the amnesty if it is returned to power next month. That is in December. So for 5 years, we sought to extend the amnesty and would have done so in December 2015. Never was there any intention on the People's Partnership government to bring in any property tax for any citizen to pay in Trinidad and Tobago. He went on to say at a post-cabinet press conference, that matter was never a priority for the Kamla Persad-Pisesa government. The government on an annual basis was simply extending the amnesty in order to allow us to waive the requirement to pay the tax because the tax was on the books. Hawaii said the last extension for the tax not to be paid expires on December 31st, but we're no longer in government after that. He said providing the government won next month's election, it would put a new amnesty in place during the 2016 national budget debate. So, and he reiterated, and I quote, I have said categorically that Cabinet has not considered this matter, nor has the matter been brought to Cabinet for consideration at any time in the last 2 years, particularly 2014 or 2015. So that puts an end to the statements of the government when they want to indicate that the UNC had the property tax in its portfolio, but we would have implemented it when we came back. I just want to bring to the attention of, as well, this issue of statements on property tax. And let me bring into consideration Prime Minister Rowley's statement in 2009 when he was leader of the opposition. And I quote, In my constituency, this is the leader of the opposition, no prime minister. In my constituency, there is anger, anxiety, and resentment at both ends of the spectrum. If you try to defend the indefensible, you create resentment and provoke people, and that is what we have at the moment. Close quote. Open quote again. Too many of our citizens are questioning the government's priorities, and they're afraid, as they are faced with this taxation, the monies will be used for things they would not approve of, especially in a climate where the government is giving the impression. So, close quote, another open quote. I do not really have to, no, all right. This was said by then the Member of Parliament for Diego Martin West, the Honourable Member, that is 2009, on the same property tax. He says, in quote, taxation is never a light matter. It is for the government to come clean and say exactly what we are doing. He's a member of the government in 2009, and he's making that statement in 2009 that the government must come clean and say exactly what we are doing. We cannot go forward under the guise that we fooled them and the money will come in down the road when it is too late. And he continues, trust is the only thing that the people want from the government. He is in government, and the only thing to ameliorate or remove the anger, the resentment and anxiety that is associated with this tax is for the government spokespersons to come clean and say what we are doing. He's a member of government and saying that in 2009. So that is Mr. Prime Minister now, Prime Minister Rowley, when he was leader of when he was in the opposition, when he was in government in 2009. And then the same person, Prime Minister Rowley, at the launch of the 2015 PNM Manifesto property tax, on August 20th, 2015, during the launch of the PNM Manifesto before the 2015 election, then Member of Parliament for Diego Martin West, Dr. Keith Rowley, stated his intention was not to reinstate the property tax as has been previously discarded by the partnership government. This is what he said in August 2015. So where are we today? The Prime Minister, when he was in government, criticized the tax. Then in 2015, he says he's not going to reinstate the property tax as has been previously discarded by the partnership government. And here we are in 2023, imposing the property tax on a beleaguered population. So he said his intention is not to raise or reinstate property tax. And he said plans were in motion for the old and land building taxes and so on. So when a reporter, Ria Rambali of CNC3, asked one of the more contentious issues in the last
on a point of order, Mr. President.
Yeah.
Standing Order 53(1)B and Standing Order 46(1). Mr. President, this is an amendment bill, and the Senator appears to be seeking to re-debate the Property Tax Act.
Senator Gopeesingh, we don't need to rehash the original part of the bill anymore. Just let's deal and stick to the topics when it comes to what we are amending to. Okay?
Right.
Or if you have to, just narrow it down for the purpose of context, okay?
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I'm making the point that here it is, the present Prime Minister in 2009 criticizing his government then about imposing a property tax. And here it is saying again in 2015 that he will not impose a property tax. And now in 2023, there is a formidable property tax which the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago have to undertake and bear the pains of it. I want to move on to the Honourable Finance Minister making a statement of bringing a historical journey in 2011 about Minister Dukaran, what he laid and so on. And making the statement that we were going to impose a 7.5%. And I made the point that this is something that was never contemplated. There was no second reading, so he cannot make any concluding statement from that whatsoever. So, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, over the period of time, 2010 to 2015, no one paid any property tax. And once we get into government again, pretty shortly, there would be no property tax to be paid. The Minister of Finance indicated that he has not suspended the property tax. And 801 persons paid, probably more than 1 million. The question is, how were they paid, or when are they going to be paid, and what methodology is going to be paid? He went on to speak about 65% of the properties were valued for less than $1,100 or less per year. It would be important for the Honourable Minister of Finance to tell the population how many properties were valued, how many citizens sent in the valuation forms, and what percentage has been assessed, and how many citizens have objected to the assessment. He said the problem is some people have to pay $486 per year or so, and some were down to $700 per year. And he went on to differentiate the areas in Trinidad where property tax was being assessed. But one of the first issues we have to be aware of is that his explanation of the methodology used for valuing these properties was based on consultations with a premier organization on property tax policy. He said it was impartial, objective, advice which will be fair and equitable, and he called it the International Property Tax Institute. And he said that that institute gave a background of principles of valuation, commentaries on property tax, review of database, procedures for efficacy, property groupings, rental rates, which came out of the process. Now, if that was done, and done properly with this institute, why is it that thousands of citizens across the country are complaining of the valuation exercise and the valuations that they have been that they have to receive for their properties? We all know that no scientific basis and no scientific methodology was used to value people's properties. And you heard my colleagues earlier on speak about two people living in almost the same premises, one being valued at one value and another one at a higher value. Even the Minister of Finance alluded to something close to one of his friends. Then on what basis, as had been mentioned previously in the other place by one of our colleagues, a member for Barataria, that the evaluators were curbside evaluators. They never visited the homes of citizens. They stood by the curb, they looked at the property, they couldn't go to the back of the property, and they valued these premises X and Y. And in some of these instances, there were exorbitant valuations. So there are a number of anomalies in terms of the valuation process, and this is what the citizens are questioning and querying. particularly those who have valuations of $300,000 for their properties and where their properties are not worth that. I want to ask the Minister of Finance, tell me what part of Trinidad and Tobago know that in a residential property that you can get $25,000 rental. No matter where he said it is upscale, Diego Martin, or West Morings, or Federation Park, or wherever. And he just encircled the Northwest area as being the area for the highest amount of value and so on. But even there, those owners whose home, they're living in their homes, they're not renting their property, but they will have to pay the pay on an annual earning of rental of about $25,000 per month. So on one hand, he segregated one part of Trinidad, Highland Park, Air Federation Park, Ellerslie, whatever, West Morings, and so on. But he's forgetting that other parts of Trinidad citizens have been bombarded with high valuations as well, even in the poorer areas. And poor citizens their homes have been overvalued. And could you imagine the 200 or 300,000 citizens who are receiving pension and NIS? And they and their wives are there receiving total about 9,000 or 10,000 per month between two of them, having to pay electricity bills, whatever, if they have internet, WASA, pay for food and so on, and now have to pay at least even $500 a month on property tax. Is a grave imposition on these citizens. So it's unfair and it is immoral to have poor people having to pay this amount of money on property tax. And the minister, the last speaker, the member for the honorable senator, asked about government earning and where would the government expect to have their earnings? Well, the government had tremendous amount of earnings because they spent, as my colleague Senator Mark indicated, more than $500 billion in an 8.5-year period. 500 billion, Mr. Vice President, that this government has spent over the last 8.5 years. Where did they get the money from? So were they not earning and they want to impose more taxation on people again? Mr. Vice President, this is a government who imposed within the last few years, taxation on fuel about 5 times. Green fund taxation on businesses, they imposed an increase in taxation of conglomerates from 25 to 30%. So there was taxes being added onto the population, and then my colleague just recently made a statement about the removal of VAT from over 7,000 items that the People's Partnership government had removed VAT, but they have now, they reintroduced the VAT on these 7,000 food items. And so the cost of living went up astronomically with the introduction of that. So the cost of living has gone up tremendously. And it is immoral for any government to continue to tax the population with this property tax. I want to make the point on the minister talking about trying to bring people's reputation and so on into disrepute. And I was sent a while ago some information on the same member, and it's a Newsday article recently, a few hours ago. Tourism, Culture and the Arts Minister Randall Mitchell says he will not be used by opposition Senator Wade Mark to distract public attention from the UNC's internal troubles. He said Mark had asked whether Mitchell had an interest in a company that owns a building in Port of Spain where Pan Trinbago is renting office space. He reiterated that his Honorable Randall Mitchell, Minister of Tourism, he reiterated that he is a 50% shareholder, 50% shareholder in Deer Street Limited, which owns a property at 55 Dundonald Street, Port of Spain. And that is the property that is being rented by Pan Trinbago. So why is the minister obfuscating when the facts are there? Why doesn't he admit that an arm of the state is renting a property that he has 50% shares in? And that is wrong. That is immoral. And he must declare.
Senator Gopeesingh, I beg for the relevance of that matter within the budget. It was placed in a context, right? If it is that you can bring that into context, please do, but I beg the relevance of it. Thank you.
On a point of order, Mr. President, Standing Order 46.6, Pan Trinbago, when last we checked, is not an arm of the state, and therefore the reference made by the senator imputes improper motives of the minister.
Standing order upheld on the matter.
Mr. Vice President, Pan Trinbago is an organization that receives funding from the state. At the last allocation was 140 million that the National Carnival Commission...
Senator Gopeesingh, I have ruled. Can you please move on to the next point, please?
I've made my comments on that, and I'll move on, Mr. Vice President. So, Mr. Vice President, how did we get here following all these P&M promises and I would say deceptive principles? I want to re-emphasize that not one person paid any property tax between 2010 and 2015. So all this talk about Larry Hawaii and land and building taxes is irrelevant. The point is, not one man, woman paid 1 cent in property tax under Prime Minister Kamla Prasad Biswa's leadership. And it's important to remember what Prime Minister Rowley said in the heart of the election. He was asked to explain their position on property tax by a reporter, and what he said. Standing next to the Minister of Finance, he said, for anybody in the government to say we are going to bring back that tax is the highest level of dishonesty. We want to ask, Mr. Vice President, who is dishonest? Standing next to the Minister of Finance, he said, and I quote, these are the Prime Minister's words, for anybody in the government to say we are going to bring back that tax is the highest level of dishonesty. Who is the one bringing back the tax? Isn't it not Prime Minister Rowley's government? So the PNM, the Prime Minister, and the Minister of Finance were all being untruthful to the population in 2015. You see how they come into office? You see how they come into office, Mr. Vice President? And 1 year later, in 2016, they started making moves to return this tax. And then every year since then, they were making moves to reintroduce it. So, Mr. Vice President, you cannot believe anything this government says because they have their own modus operandi for trying to fool the population. One part of the bill, Mr. Vice President, that is Clause 2 of the bill, subsection 3, which my colleague spoke about, but I just want to clarify one area. In Section 53A, by deleting the word affirmative and substituting the word negative as the means by which the minister may amend the schedules. So the minister in this has asked for negative resolution, for us to approve negative resolution when it comes to this tax issue. I want to bring you to a statement made by the Honorable Minister of Finance. And I want to quote the reference. During the committee stage in the Senate on 11th May 2018, the Minister of Finance said the following at pages 124 to 125 of the Hansard. Mr. Imbert, I quote, "Yes, Madam Chairman. Let us go now to our proposed amendment, and let me explain our proposed amendment to Senator Mark. Perhaps he can see things our way. The important and fundamental schedule that would impact upon people in is Schedule 1. Schedule 1 is a rate of tax, and I'm proposing an amendment. Before we deal with yours, that would make any minister responsible for taxes required to come and debate a change in the rate." So this is Minister Imbert speaking. So if we are going to change 3% to 1% or 5% or 4% or 5% to 10% as the case may be, the minister will have to come and amend that schedule by affirmative resolution. So that is very important, he said. So that one is affirmative. And he spoke about rates of taxation. So why is he coming today? To ask the Senate to give him afford him negative resolution process and not affirmative resolution, when in 2018, May 2018, under Hansard, he spoke about ensuring that for taxation purposes, it is affirmative resolution. And so he went on to state, so therefore, I am proposing that the important schedule, which is a rate of tax, any change to that be subject to affirmative resolution. Any change, the rate of tax, that be subject to affirmative resolution. So on one hand, in 2018, the Minister of Finance is speaking about affirmative resolution for the change of tax. But in 4 years later, 5 years later, he's saying that it should be under negative resolution. That is gross hypocrisy, Mr. Vice President. It is, I can't afford to use the type of language that can be used on it, and I wouldn't get myself down there, but you can't have saying something in 2018 on a matter of principle. You know that it is fundamentally wrong for you to say that you want negative resolution when you're dealing with taxation matters. And I think Senator Hazel Thompson Ahi drew reference to that in her presentation as well. So, Mr. Vice President, it's important for us
Senator,
now,
you have 5 more minutes.
Yeah, it's important for us to understand and appreciate what the government is doing to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. We stand firm and resolute on the opposition side and in support with our distinguished leader that there is no way that we will support this piece of legislation. The UNC was always against this wicked, heartless tax. As all taxes do, is punish people. UNC is against anything that punishes improvement. And this government has borrowed over $140 billion and counting, with a level of borrowing that can go to $75 billion more on the Development Loans Act. So they are unable to govern this country. They have mismanaged this country for 8.5 years. They have ruined this country. They have pauperized the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, and yet want to continue to impose taxation and taxation on citizens. It is wicked, and it is immoral. Yeah, immoral. And this whole methodology of calculating taxes based on average rental value, when homeowners never even built their homes with the intention to rent. You build your home, you intend to rent, you want to live, but you're basing your taxation on annual rental value. Their homes were built for citizens to live in, not to rent. People build their homes to live in. And it's like charging an unemployed person national insurance and health surcharge. And it was the Prime Minister himself who would have said, if you don't have a house, then you don't have to worry about property tax. So own nothing and be happy. Yeah. That's how the PNM wants you. And Mr. Vice President, it's like saying you don't have to worry about shoes if you get rid of your feet. So it's an outrageous rental value assessment. Furthermore, the impractical, wrong, willy-nilly valuation made even some of us wonder if this is a real place. Some of the properties that we have seen that were valued at almost $100,000 per year makes me wonder what went into the valuation. Or did they value the oil and gas underground the house? Some tiny wooden houses like what we grew up in. I grew up in a very tiny home, yeah, a wooden home with leafy on the floor, yeah, downstairs. You have to build it on stilts. And there are thousands who have that still. But you want to impose a taxation on these poor people? Never, Mr. Vice President. Let's be real. How can some of these properties be valued at so much? And Minister of Finance must find these renters, because if people are willing to pay so much for rent, better people stay home and just rent out their small home. And there's the stifling potential for future homeowners. The tax is also just going to make future home ownership for young families an out-of-reach goal. Getting a home is one of, if not the biggest achievement a family can aspire to. Every family wants a home. You have over 150,000 citizens in Trinidad and Tobago asking the HDC for homes. And however, here the PNM is just seeking to make people into renters and not homeowners. They prefer citizens to have no assets or wealth to pass on while they own multiple properties, as has been mentioned, and avoid all the taxes that come with it. Look at Alora, right here in Port of Spain. I'm sure Minister Imbert knows what I'm talking about. Renters will be affected too. One more point. Renters, do not think you will be spared by this property tax, because if a landlord now has an additional cost to pay that was never present before, what do you think he or she will do? Will the landlord say, well, I pay I pay this tax out of my own pocket and save my tenants? You live in a la-la land. The landlord will simply raise the rent to cover that cost. So do not think you will be spared tenants. Everything will go up because of this. And my political leader and former Prime Minister always says, this is an inheritance tax as well. The person who inherits this property will inherit the taxes, and if they cannot pay, then you hand over the keys to this wicked PNM government and your cronies. This tax is just another nail in the coffin of an already beleaguered and battered population. PNM must scrap this tax, and if not, the UNC will when we form the next government. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President.